In order to spawn the Wall of Flesh, you usually drop a guide voodoo doll into the lava in the underworld. But why exactly does this cause the guide to die? I'll be discussing the possibilities as to why this is the case, and I'll cover who the guide really is, his connections to the underworld, and why his life was specifically used to spawn the Wall of Flesh with my thoughts and theories. Before the video starts, if you find this video interesting, comment down whether you think the guide is evil or not, subscribe if you're new, and join our new Discord server, link is in the description. The guide is already in your world as soon as you spawn. He has infinite knowledge about every crafting recipe and is quite knowledgeable on the game overall. It's clear he knows a lot, but why is this important? Well, why was he burned alive to summon the Wall of Flesh in the first place? This might be a stretch, but maybe the underworld entities saw the guide's knowledge as a threat or a danger. Maybe his unexplained wisdom makes him more than just a friendly helper. Maybe he was seen as a target. Now let's take a look at who actually lives in the underworld. You have lava slimes, lava bats, and fire imps, but you've got more importantly two types of demons, regular demons and voodoo demons, the ones holding the guide voodoo dolls. In real life, voodoo dolls have been used in various African religions, typically for healing or protection, not harm. But through pop culture, they've become more associated with witchcraft, harming someone by harming the doll. Does that sound familiar? Yeah. Now what does this mean? 1. The underworld is home to a satanic or witch-like cult, a group that intentionally created a voodoo doll of the guide. This would mean the guide did something to offend or threaten them, enough for them to actually curse them with a ritual item. Or 2. The guide's death is unintentional, maybe the doll wasn't supposed to represent him, or maybe the underworld entities didn't mean to invoke him. It could just be the result of bad luck when the doll hits the lava. To be honest, option 1 does seem a lot more believable, and soon we will completely confirm that it is option 1. Either way, it leaves us with a big question. What could the guide have done to actually deserve this fate? No one knows for sure, at least I don't. But if there's one thing that's clear, it's that his knowledge, power, and unexplained connection to the world could have definitely been seen as a threat. An important detail that often gets overlooked is that the guide isn't actually the only NPC with a voodoo doll. There's also a Clothia voodoo doll, and this matters more than you might think, possibly offering evidence that the guide isn't evil at all. The Clothia voodoo doll drops from dungeon enemies and lets you attack the Clothia directly. If you kill them at night while the doll is equipped, it summons Skeletron. This lines up because the Clothia is actually the old man that you meet at the dungeon entrance, so in that case, the voodoo doll simply lets you recreate the normal boss summon method. Now, following the pop culture idea of voodoo dolls, where a doll represents a person that can be used to magically harm them, if the Clothia voodoo doll perfectly correlates with the pop culture idea of voodoo dolls, it's most likely that the guide voodoo doll follows it as well. Which means that the underworld enemies probably aren't following any religious tradition with the voodoo dolls, more just to actually inflict pain to the guide, which completely disregards the second observation we were talking about before, but I mean, like, who would have ever thought that? This is quite an interesting segment, and it's following the quotes between the guide and the Clothia. Once the guide has been killed to spawn the Wall of Flesh, and a new one spawns in, you might hear this quote from the guide.
I wonder why my predecessor spontaneously burst into flames. I hope it doesn't happen to me.
This could hint at something important, that the guide genuinely has no idea why he was sacrificed. It suggests he's just as confused as the player, possibly unaware of the actions that played in the underworld. Only if that was true though. Quote from the guide, when you are ready to challenge the keeper of the underworld, you will have to make a living sacrifice. Everything you need for it can be found in the underworld. How does the guide know that you need to make a living sacrifice to spawn the Wall of Flesh, but he doesn't know that that living sacrifice is him? So maybe he's like possessed or something, or maybe he's just like, I don't know, an idiot. But there's so many inconsistencies with like this whole video because like nothing makes sense. If you dig deeper, there's another quote that stands out.
I'm quite fond of Nemeth Clothia. We have a lot in common.
This is where things get interesting. The Clothia, as we know, is the old man who was possessed and killed to spawn Skeletron and has a voodoo variant. If the guide feels like he has a lot in common with the Clothia in general, just from, personality and talking, they are also both are used to spawn bosses and both have voodoo variants. But all of that's unknown to them, you know what I mean? Like, they don't actually know that. Maybe it's like some sort of spiritual connection because they both have voodoo variants or something. These quotes might seem harmless and just like a joke from the devs, which they literally definitely 100% are, but in the context of voodoo dolls and for the sake of theory, it's interesting to think about, you know what I mean? A more two-dimensional theory is that the developers purposely chose this method of spawning the wall of flesh to symbolize the hard mode journey as difficult and unforgiving. Why else would they make you kill your day one guide that helped you all through pre-hard mode? Some food for thought. According to lore, the Terraria world is a living entity with its own consciousness, so maybe it's just the Terraria world's idea to do all of this. In summary, is the guide evil? Due to the lack of solid evidence, honestly making him seem even more innocent? Probably not. I doubt many people thought he was to begin with. Wouldn't make sense, to be honest, because it kind of doesn't make sense why he was killed to spawn the wall of flesh. I hope my ideas challenged your thoughts. If you have enjoyed this video and haven't commented already, let me know what you think about this video and let me know your favorite theory. Join the Discord linked in description and subscribe if you haven't already. Apart from that, I'll see you guys in the next video.